You are traveling to another train of thought, one not from this century and challenging the status quo. You are now entering the paradigm shift.
Well, good morning. Tuesday, January 8th, 2019. We are live with a new episode of The Paradigm Shift. And I'm Jeff Johnson, the host. Welcome to the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thank you for listening on our network. We have lots of programming always on our our radio station. There's something playing 24 hours a day. We're not always live, but you'll hear the repeats of the shows that are live. You know, we have the Mark and Suzanne show with Mark Kreslins and Suzanne Sherman. We have the Suzanne sorry, Suzanne. The Wasatch Report. I'm going back to the her previous network. Holy cow. Now we're going way back in time. So we have the Wasatch Report with Suzanne Sherman. We have Case in Point, again with Suzanne Sherman. If you're not getting a little bit of a idea here that Suzanne is very prolific in her radio entourage. So we have the Case in Point, where she goes over different various cases that go before the courts, whether it's the Supreme Court or the circuit courts. And she breaks them down and brings some sanity to the whole idea of the courts ruling our lives with rulings. Because that's what it is. They make rulings, and somehow people think that they've made new law. So Suzanne has that show. We have the Bailey Report. With Daniel Bailey. He does them occasionally. When his work schedule allows. He's in the same boat I am. Our work makes doing our little hobby here, because that's what it is at this point. Honestly, Suzanne and I, Greg Carpenter, I will get to his shows in a minute. We would all love to see this become a professional thing. We would love to see to have a real producer. I do most of the producing. That's just, and so what happens? I have zero prior producing experience. Everything I do is self-taught. So pretty much everything you heard is something I taught myself to do. And is it professional? No. Is it the best it could be? No. Because I just don't, number one, I don't have the tools. The computers are not up to the grade that they need to be to do a lot of this stuff. We again still have no phone lines to take live phone calls. That's our number one problem. I mean, honestly, I'm just being upfront with the listeners. That is our biggest problem. We just don't have the technology to do it. And we would love for this to go professional. We'd love to have the funds. I mean, if someone out there is independently wealthy, believes in this message, and is willing to fund it, to hire a full-time producer, someone that knows what they're doing, we would love to take this. So I'll just put that out there. I mean, we're self-funding this at this point. The hosts, we're taking care of all of the expenses. We don't have advertising. You don't hear ads throughout the hour. We do it pretty much ad-free. I'm going to take a break about sometime through here. It might take 2 breaks sometime through this hour just to give myself a break. I'm kind of just easing myself back into this. I haven't done a lot of shows lately, as you all know. So if there's someone out there that would love to fund this project and take it to that next level, we would love to talk to you. So we have Daniel Bailey and we have Greg Carpenter. Greg Carpenter has Liberty Minutes. If you listen at 8 a.m., I know that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we have Liberty Minutes set up at 8 a.m. There's an hour. There's a bunch of different things in that hour. Some stuff from Suzanne, and I think there's some shift stuff for Mike Mahary podcasts, which we have Mike Mahary's podcast in here. So we, like I said, we have Mike Mahary in his podcasts. We have Shift Gold, their Friday Gold wrap up on here as well. So we have all kinds of content all through the day, and it's on 24 hours a day. And we try to do live shows as often as our schedules allow. And at this point, again, without a dedicated producer, the shows are limited because of my time constraints, because of things going on with my work and my life. I have family and everything else going on too. So, excuse me. So, let's just get right into it. We haven't had a show in a while, so let's start with something relatively local. It's in the state of Pennsylvania, but it's a good ways away in Pennsylvania. The city of Pittsburg is looking at some sort of new gun control laws. I think there's some talk of, let me just look in here. I think there's some talk of gun confiscation and stuff along those lines. So the other day, there was a rally protesting these proposed new laws in the city of Pittsburg. I'm going to play this news piece now. This is CBS News Channel 2 in Pittsburg. Oh, KDKA, CBS Pittsburg. So hold on a second. Let me. So we had, hold on a second. Here's this producing and hosting at the same time. So trying to run the mouse all over the screen and get things taken down so you don't have extraneous stuff coming over about the next story on KDKA. So anyway, here we have folks out protesting. The city of Pittsburgh talking about banning specific weapons, the firearms. They're not weapons, they're firearms. They're just tools. So I didn't listen to all the speeches, so I don't know exactly what their grounds were. The one guy in that piece spoke about preemption. Pittsburgh does not have the legal authority to do these bans under Pennsylvania state law because the state constitution and state laws preempt the local laws. That is in our state constitution. Furthermore, under our state constitution, they don't have this authority because, let's see, I'll get to the proper section here. It's 23, I believe. 21. Article 1, Section 21. Right to bear arms. And this is what applies. My bet is that there are people there at that rally saying they can't do this. I have a Second Amendment right. Again, I didn't listen to the speeches. The one guy had it right. He was talking about state law. So he is on the right page. I would bet that there's a lot of those speakers were quoting the Second Amendment. And I know there's a Second Amendment lawyer here in PA, very well known. He's on my friend list on Facebook. I constantly harp on him that this is not a Second Amendment issue when he's suing in a federal court in Pennsylvania over something that's happening in Pennsylvania. He's in the wrong court, arguing the wrong Bill of Rights. Or the wrong constitution. Let's just put it that way. So Article 1, Section 21. Or it might be, hold on a second. Let's make sure I'm quoting the right article. Because I do not want to be incorrect. Yes, Article 1, Section 21. I had it correct. Right to bear arms. The right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. That is the constitutional section that applies to the people of Pennsylvania. The Second Amendment doesn't. Not in this case because it's not the federal government proposing these laws. It's a city in the state of Pennsylvania. So under two different ways, Pittsburgh cannot do this. First, under preemption. That means they can't do it. So even if they enact this, if our good friend on Facebook was going to sue, and he sued in a state court, because this isn't federal. He sued there, and he went with preemption and Article 1, Section 21. Pittsburgh has no authority to ban people's ability to buy specific firearms because they're calling into question their right to bear arms. And Pennsylvania's Constitution is much better than the federal one because it spells out why. And it spells out who. The citizen. It speaks nothing of militias. And it speaks nothing. It isn't vague in its wording. it is very specific that they can bear arms for their own defense and the defense of their families, obviously, and this to defend the state. So, Pittsburgh is not within the bounds of the state law. And that's where this all comes down to. Stop fighting this over the Second Amendment. This is not about the Second Amendment. And again, why is that? Because this Bill of Rights were not written to apply to the states. And where do you get that from? You get it from the preamble. Let me grab the preamble to the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, because that is what clarifies the whole point of the Bill of Rights. So here we go. The Bill of Rights. First 10 amendments of the Constitution, December 15, 1791. Let's see. Congress of the United States begun and held in the city of New York on Wednesday, 4th of March, 1789. So these were all proposed in 1789, and they were ratified by the states December 15, 1791. Again, what is the Constitution? This is pivotal to this whole discussion. What is the Constitution? Is it the law of the land? I know I'm going off this what we're talking about for a second, but this is something I was thinking about the other day. Is the Constitution the law of the land? Anyone out there? I know you can't call in. We were just discussing that. Is it the law of the land? And I see that our good friend Suzanne is in here in our virtual studio with me. Suzanne, you can just say yes or no. Is the Constitution the law of the land? Oh, she must be away from her computer because she didn't unmute her mic. All right. Suzanne's not talking this morning. Okay, make me some too, please. Never mind, folks. Anyway, is it law, or is it a contract between the states that set up a government, a system of government? In this, it was a compact. It's a contract. A compact is an older term that means contract. The states contracted together to form a general government to act on their behalf over very limited things, very specific. Now, we can talk about the failure of that contract and the fact that since it's now defunct, that now that it's been completely ignored, that now the contract has been breached beyond repair, the general government has breached its contract with the states. So what does that leave us? That leaves us dissolving the contract. But the notion that this is law, this is somehow law that rules the people and rule the states, that is not what was made. What was made is, again, a contract between the states to create an agent to act on their behalf over 17 specific things that were enumerated powers. So that brings us back to this discussion. Why were the Bill of Rights added, and who does this apply to? So, the beginning of the preamble, the conventions of the number of, let's start over. I haven't done radio in a while. I will speak English for the English speakers out there. The conventions of a number of the states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the grounds of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. Whose institution? The federal government. This was not there to restrict the states. Nowhere in there does it talks about the states being restricted. It talks about the states restricting the federal government, but it says nothing about these restricting the states. Why? Because the states have their own constitution. I read you the Pennsylvania section that is related to the Second Amendment, if you will. That is the state's version of the Second Amendment. And again, like I said, it is a better expression of that right of the natural right of the people to have their natural rights protected. Sorry, I'm reading in the background as somebody's messaging me in my window here. Yes, and whatever was not delegated. Well, let's go right here. Let's go to 9 and 10. Since Suzanne, thank you for bringing that up. So, let's see, Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So, they listed some of the restrictive clauses on the federal government. This Amendment 1, they can't abridge the freedom of the press. They can't establish a religion. Does that mean that a religion is prohibited from being in the public domain? No. It just means that the federal government can't establish one. There is no separation of church and state. There is only a restriction on the government, the state, from restricting your natural right to free expression of your religion. So, if number 9 says if they forgot to add some right, it belongs to the people. Federal government has no authority over it. So, if your state thinks that there's a right to murder babies, that belongs to the people of that state. The federal government has no authority over it. They could not rule that there's some right to murder babies and make it a federal expensive thing for all 50 states. Because it belongs to the people. If there is indeed a right to murder, because that's what we're talking about here, then it's up to the states. It's up to the people of the states. It's not up to the federal government. That's what number 9 means. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively and to the people. So let's go back here a little bit. We'll get back to this gun control thing in Pittsburgh. Is this proposed ban by Pittsburgh being proposed by the federal government to be implemented in Pittsburgh? No. So it has nothing to do with the federal government. This doesn't belong in federal court. This doesn't belong under the Second Amendment. It has nothing to do with it. It belongs to the people or the states. So that's why, again, the Pennsylvania Constitution is the one that matters. That's the one that you have to apply here. And that's why I read you the pertinent section. If you read Pennsylvania's, It's actually very good. It lists it's listing of rights that are off limits to the government, because that's what this is basically doing as well. It's listing rights that are off limits to the government. It's not listing rights it's giving, because again, as we said before, rights are not given to us by government. Rights are ours naturally by human beings, by being alive. If you're a Christian, you believe that they come from God. If you are not, because we have people that are not Christians that listen to this network, you would say they come from nature, from natural. It's whatever's out there that gives us whatever. I mean, you know, I'm trying to keep it away from the spiritual realm, but, you know, whatever is out there in the cosmos that grants us our natural rights, that's what some of our non-Christian believers would have to go by. Jefferson called them inalienable rights. So I'm hoping that what we see here in Pennsylvania is that this continues to stay in Pennsylvania. I'm hoping that if this does go to a court challenge, that they don't take it to a federal court, because it doesn't belong there. It belongs in a PA court. And again, you heard in there, at least I don't know if you could hear the people, but they were reporting that they were saying, we will not comply. That is, if this goes through and some court would somehow decide in its favor that they can somehow they can question your right to own a specific gun because it has a pistol grip or a flash suppressor or whatever on it. That's what's next. It's civil disobedience. Disobey the law. And that's where one of these days, Suzanne, we need to have a discussion on jury nullification, because that's what's going to have to come down when this starts to happen. When people start, excuse me, I got a cough. When people start being arrested for these things, jury nullification is what we're going to have to, it's what's going to have to happen. Go ahead, Suzanne. I know you unmuted yourself.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Plugged in. Okay. Hopefully this will work and there's no echo. That sounds better. Absolutely. You know, the other day, I think you were listening in or involved. I had a conversation with a gentleman who has his own radio show. And, you know, we have these very pro Second Amendment, pro gun shows, and good for them. But, you know, they have to be careful. Are they really sending in with good intentions the wrong message to people? Because when I reminded him that, you know, according to what you were discussing, the Constitution is ratified, the Second Amendment in particular that he was going over is a restriction against the general government. And his reaction was, no, the states can't do it either. And his theory was the states would never create a general government. They were so concerned about having limited powers, but then themselves having unlimited powers. It made no sense. So I tried to share the article that Carl Jones and I wrote about national reciprocity and how this was a violation of the 10th Amendment. And no, we're having none of that. The Second Amendment applies to every state. The states cannot infringe upon our rights. And there's just an absolute disregard for history, even when it's right out there in front of them. People don't want to hear it. And, you know, it just gets very discouraging sometimes, because you try to have a voice and educate people. You know, we challenge people on this network all the time to change your paradigm shift. Hello. And a lot of people struggle and get very nasty when they're challenged to do so.
That's correct. And the whole, you know, this whole idea that the states created a government that was going to destroy them is just absurd. And that's where, if you go back again, Patrick Henry, in his opposition to the Constitution, said that this whole idea, this written Constitution, would destroy the states. And in hindsight, in light of history, who was telling the truth? Who was correct in their assessment of the Constitution? The Federalists Madison, Hamilton, or were Robert Yates and Governor Clinton of New York and Patrick Henry and on and on and on.
Well, interestingly, Patrick Henry opened the Virginia ratification debate with the statement, "I smell a rat," and he was absolutely correct. And just to get back to jury nullification, when I tell people, look, ultimately, you have to fight these battles with the states within that state jurisdiction and not run to the federal judiciary. And when that fails and you cannot effectuate with a change with your legislatures, well, you either do what I did and move, or you just comply, or you roll the dice with jury nullification. Now, what makes education so important is the jurors, the members of the jury pool, us, should know about jury nullification and not be intimidated by the courtroom setting, because the judge will instruct the jury, if you find these facts, then you have no choice but to convict. And they do have a choice. They have the right. They have an obligation to use their sound judgment to refuse to apply a law that is applied unjustly or is unjust in and of itself. It doesn't render the law null and void on the books, but it does as applied to that case. We really, really need to make sure people understand that ultimately, if this were to work out, the legislatures would realize, and the district attorneys, that it's futile to prosecute people under these cases when we, the people, have had enough.
Right. And that's where I was going with this, that we are to a point where we will have to decide, because it's all moving ahead very quickly. You see perfect example. I wasn't intending to bring this up, but I saw an article the other day about Marco Rubio. Oh, Mr. Conservative, Republican senator that's just he's on spot on, and he's our guy, talking about red flag laws, gun control. What are we going to do when our own team, quote unquote, is on board with the destruction of your liberty and your natural rights? It's going to come down to, we are going to have to roll the dice with civil disobedience. Just disobey. I mean, I've mentioned this many times before. New York State, and again, their constitution stinks. If you live in New York State, leave, because your constitution there does not protect any of these rights. It's all been removed. Read your constitution. There's nothing in there defending your right to bear arms and defend yourself, or to keep the government from taking away those natural rights. There's no restrictions. So what happened? They passed the SAFE Act a few years ago. In it, they required statewide registration of semi-automatic rifles. Certain ones, specific ones. The bad ones. The AR-15, the AK-47. Because they have terrible things like a pistol grip or bayonet lug. Who goes around putting a bayonet on their AR? I haven't seen anyone yet. So it has an AR. It has a bayonet lug. It's an evil rifle. So they passed this law. They estimate there's 2 million ARs and AKs and etc. These bad guns in New York. They had less than 100,000. Less than 100,000 actually register. So that means there's millions of people in New York who are now felons in the state of New York. What did the state police say after that, when they saw that no one was going to obey the law? They just said, well, we're just not going to enforce it. So civil disobedience has changed law enforcement's stance. They're just not going to go knocking on doors because there's just too many people that aren't complying. They're not going to do it. And they know that it's going to be very dangerous, them going and trying to confiscate these weapons and arrest these people. So you have that. I'm trying to think of any other examples. Suzanne, do you know any other examples of people where their states have passed laws where they've just ignored it? Civil disobedience, I can't think of any right off the top of my head right now.
Well, I think in Boulder, Colorado now, with the requirement that they get their ARs certified, in quotes, that is being met with everybody's ignoring that one. I think you might have mentioned the SAFE Act in New York and Pennsylvania. So, but yeah, in Boulder, I think that's what the most recent one. It was a municipal ordinance, and from what I'm hearing, people are just saying, meh.
Yeah, and speaking of which, and then there was one in Illinois. Some local place was putting a ban, and matter of fact, you had to turn the firearms in or something, and everyone ignored them too.
You know, the problem is if you get caught with them, they make the penalties so draconian that I use the example again, and because typically this is how it works out. The husband has the illegal firearms or whatever equipment that they deem criminal, and the wife will say, we can't take this risk, you have to turn them in. Or even whoever has them might decide of their own accord, I just can't afford to go to state prison if something happens. What if my house catches fire? What if I'm in an injury? What if there's an accident and somebody has to come into my house to help us and they find these firearms, or I'm in a car accident. I think I shared a story in California when I lived there. I took a class, a defensive carbine class, and I changed the bullet button out on my carbine, on my firearm, and it was for purposes of training. I asked my instructor, well, what do you think I should do? Leave it on? He goes, if you're going to get in a gunfight, something's going to happen. Are you going to have that bullet button on there? I said, hell no. So we took it off. Well, after a long day of this, and then I knew I was going to have to be there early the next day, I just rolled the dice and drove home with that. But I thought if I got in an accident and had to go to the hospital, or my vehicle was impounded and a police officer checked that, I was in California, I would go to state prison.
Right, and that's what I said earlier. That your state has made millions, literally millions of people federal felons.
Yeah,
overnight.
Exactly.
And that's the crapshoot. Again, I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to give names or make it very. Someone wanted to use his AR to go coyote hunting the other night. That's in my safe, and I took him a different firearm that was not regulated in the state of New York because I wasn't going to be there. And if I wasn't there, that firearm in his possession would make him a felon, where I can, because of my law enforcement status, that firearm is not a felony for me. So I wasn't there. So I gave him a firearm, excuse me, it's not a weapon. I gave him a firearm that would not cause issues if law enforcement became involved in the discussion. And that's the problem with these laws. I mean, that you now have made a decision. So now you must think about all the consequences that can arise. And so, I had to make a decision. I made it the right one for this person and gave him a firearm that was compliant and that would not cause issues with law enforcement. So I think we've talked about firearms enough. I didn't intend to spend this long on this whole subject. I wanted to get into something I heard on the radio last night. I heard a radio on the local radio station, their top of the hour news breaks. I think they use ABC. And when I got home this morning and I was able to search, I could not find the sound bite they played. There was some congressman saying that that the government had a responsibility to care for, to provide for these immigrants that are coming across our border, southern border, illegally. And I guess that comes down to, does government have the authority to provide for these people? Let's expand this a little bit. Does government have the authority to provide for anybody under this Constitution? The answer is no. Show me in there, and general welfare clause is not law, is not, again, not law, is not applicable, because that is a descriptor. That paragraph is a descriptor of what follows. What follows the general welfare clause is the enumerated powers that are set up for the general welfare. So, general welfare is accomplished by the enumerated powers. In other words, let's just put it that way. That might be a little bit more. That might be a little bit more clear than the way I said it a second ago. So, general welfare is accomplished by the enumerated powers. If it's not enumerated, they don't have the power, and it's not part of the general welfare. So, name the article and section that grants the general government the authority to provide for people's needs. To steal from one citizen to give to another. To steal from one citizen and to give someone who has no right to even be here, has no claim on citizenship, is not under the authority of our laws. It's not there. Don't waste your time looking for it. They were not given authority to steal from one group to give to another group, whether a citizen or an alien. Now, if this person said his Christian duty was to provide for these people and that the church would provide for these, then yes, I have no problem with that. If the church wants to provide for the needs of these people that are in these detention centers awaiting to be sent home, that's fine. And the government, while they're there, does have a obligation to not let them starve to death and whatever, but they also need to get rid of them very quickly. They need to return them to their country as quickly as possible. It's not their job to provide for these people indefinitely for months on end. Beyond the fact that the general government has no authority over immigration to begin with. Again, Suzanne wrote an article, look that up on the 10th Amendment Center. Immigration is a state issue. If the states want immigrants, they can let them in. Naturalization is the federal delegated authority. The way that they become citizens is an enumerated power. So we have this whole idea that we must have a wall to protect the southern border. Will this wall actually stop immigration? It might slow it. I mean, but really, is it going to stop? Is it going to solve the problem? Now, my solution is not going to be 100% stop it either, but it's definitely a lot less expensive than spending $5 billion on a wall. Because in reality, it'll save money because we won't be providing housing, medical care, education, health care, food for these people. If they come here illegally, the draw of free stuff should go away. There should be no free stuff. and it's not free. You and I both know that if it's free, it means they stole it from the citizens to give to these folks. We could save hundreds of billions of dollars a year by ending these giveaways. If they weren't getting this stuff, they're going to go home because there's no draw. There's no freebies now. They're not going to have free education. They're not going to have anything. Excuse me. Had a cough. Had to mute myself. There's a two-pronged way that we can solve this issue. If there is a negative outcome for employers that hire people that aren't here legally, they won't hire them. Whether it's heavy fines or even jail time for breaking law. I don't know. But if there's a negative outcome for hiring people that don't belong here legal or are here illegally, then that'll mean there's no incentive for these people to come here to work because there's no work. And the second end is there's no incentive to come here because they're going to get free housing, free food, free medical care, and free education. Then the incentive is not to come here. But a wall, it's a very poor Band-Aid on the bigger issue. We're going to spend money for something that's not going to stop this because there's too many other incentives for them to come here. So, to get back to that, we don't, as a people, have an obligation to provide for these people. Period. As a human being, maybe you do. Maybe as Christians, you have an obligation to do charitable work to help them. But as a citizen in a governmental unit, no. We do not have an obligation to provide for these people. The last thing I wanted to get into, Suzanne, you shared an article the other day from Faux News. Socialism is rising. Dems take House, pushing massive government expansion as party lurches left. It's not lurching left. It's been left for a long time. As a matter of fact, so has the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been just as far left, just slower. They're just not going off the cliff as fast.
Well, they go left in the areas we want them to. They talk about the drug wars. That's big government. That's progressive. They want more money for education. Let's talk about the wall. Who's crazy enough to want to be on the same side of the wall as these megalomaniacs in Washington, D.C. when that thing's finally finished? I sure don't.
Well, a long time ago, Ron Paul was saying that the wall is two-sided. It's there to keep people in. So here we are talking about this article about socialism rising. At some point, people will want to get out. And you look at all these socialist countries. What do they build? What was in Berlin? You remember that, Suzanne? Remember President Reagan standing there while they tear down this wall?
Exactly. We already have the IRS talking about denying passports if you're behind on your taxes. What happens when they come up with other reasons for you to not be able to leave? And isn't that wall going to really make it easy for them? People aren't thinking of the big picture. You know, just like the people that are demanding national reciprocity and think it's a good idea, they fail to understand what's going to happen when, not if, but when the Marxists really take over this government And now the national government says, all those national carry permits that you have, it's a de facto system because we didn't create our own law. Well, again, they're going to create one. They're going to tweak it, as we know. But in the interest of safety, we're going to revoke those. So now nobody's going to get them. Or we're not going to let, pick your, if people can't get a passport because they owe taxes to the IRS, how much easier is that wall going to be? What about when we have collapse here and want to leave?
Exactly.
It's scary to think that we're walled in.
It's two-sided. It keeps people. And like I said, you had the Berlin Wall. Why did they have it? To keep the East Berlin people from escaping to freedom. And what will happen when they have a wall on our borders? It'll be there to keep people in from escaping to freedom.
And face it, we know a lot of people moving to Mexico and Central and Latin America. It's entirely comprehensible that people might want to just head on down there. And again, what's the point of having a wall when we have oceans on every side as well? And a wall's not going to do a thing unless we stop with the federal benefits. I think you mentioned that earlier. The people come here. One woman, I think, during this whole caravan debacle, she actually scrambled over under whatever the wall, squatted and had her baby. Boom, now she's in. We need to fix these other things first. We've got a tremendous magnet drawing people here that the Democrats and even the Republicans want. I mean, remember George Bush saying they were good for the economy? People that cross the border, they're good for the economy. So they want them. It's cheap labor. They count for votes and they keep them in power. But what my feeling here is I've been thinking about this as it's been going on, is the biggest danger to our freedom is nothing that's going to be coming across that border. It's from the megalomaniacs that are already instilled and sitting there in power over us in Washington, D.C. right now. They love to refocus on a bunch of third world illiterates rather than the people that are legitimately elected one way or another, who illegitimately taken power over our lives, and there's nothing we can do about it right now. You know that. There's nothing we can do. Let
me get into this article real quick. We only have 5 minutes left here. The growing socialist wing of the Democrat Party will flex its muscles Thursday with the seating of the new Congress as more self-described Democrat socialists join the ranks, and dozens of sitting and incoming members, including likely 2020 hopefuls, embrace a massive government expansion that would make FDR look like a penny pincher. The party agenda is increasingly embracing big government policies like Medicare for all and guaranteed jobs programs. Again, where is the enumerated powers for government to be the medical provider? Where is the enumerated power for government to be job guarantors? They're not there. It's not there. As well as an aggressive Green New Deal that would include all of this and more as part of a fundamental overhaul to America's economy and specifically its energy sector. Excuse me. So let me go down here. Now, 2 more Democrat socialists will join Bernie Sanders in Congress on Thursday. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat, New York, and Rashida Tlaib, Democrat, Michigan. Ocasio has embraced this mantle, while Tlaib is a member of the Democrat Socialists of America. And while Ocasio-Cortez and Tlaib represent only a sliver of the Democrat Party's new majority in the House, they have attracted outsized media attention or pushing policies with dozens of supporters. So anyway, we have a general government that is now going to be pushing a system of government that is not in this written constitution. We are now on the cusp of becoming the USSR in the USSA. We're on the cusp of becoming China, where just recently Google helped China in the arrest of hundreds of Christians. They have social scoring over there that will not allow you to travel. So here we go. They got the wall. Get the social scoring, which will deny you the right to have denies you the right to have a passport. So you can't travel. You can't move. You can't get out past the wall. We are quickly heading to a point where there's, again, going back to the beginning of this show, where I discussed that we are going to have to do away with this contract. The contract has been breached, and it is time for us to do away with the contract. We are at that point where it's going to be, we must either knuckle under and become good little drones for government, good little servants of government, and do what they want, or we're going to have to break away. That's why this whole idea and this whole notion of this peaceful divorce is so important. There's a group on Facebook called Peaceful Divorce, Political Divorce, and that's where we're having to head. CalExit, Texit, whole bunch of these different places now. We have people that are discussing this very issue, and it's time that we start working towards that end, because these folks, these Democrat socialists, they're not going to stop. They're not going to give up. They are going to keep going. They're like the Energizer Bunny. They keep going and going and going. They are not going to stop until they have taken every bit of your liberty, every bit of your freedom. That's why these gun control laws, these red flag laws, are so insidious. That's why we have to keep watching. We have to keep opposing them. Civil disobedience. We have to secede from these people. We have to do what we have to do to protect our freedom, and that is going to be separation. Well, obviously the music's playing in the background. That means my time's up. I surprised myself. It's running. Okay, yeah. All right, folks, this is the Paradigm Shift on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon.